Now we're going to jump into the sketching part of our GeoFilter, and I'm going to start out by sharing some of the pens, pencils, and tools I use and why. So before we get started sketching out our GeoFilter, you may be wondering, before we start sketching out our GeoFilter, you may wonder what pens and pencils you should use to sketch out your GeoFilter. So I'm going to show you a few of the tools I use, but I want to first say to keep in mind that you don't need a bunch of fancy tools to get started. We're essentially going to be digitizing this, so we just need a rough sketch. So essentially what you can use is just a pencil and a pen like a Sharpie or something, and also just some regular paper. I'm using printer paper, and that's what I've used for a lot of my works, especially sketches. So just keep in mind that you don't have to get a bunch of fancy tools, but I'm going to go ahead and show you some of the tools I like to use. So first is, of course, the paper. I've mentioned that I've used printer paper, just 8.5 by 11, and nothing fancy here, so I'm going to move on. Next is my pencil, and I just mentioned this one, which is just a regular 2B pencil. It's an art pencil, but you could use any number 2 pencil, and that should be fine. But more often I end up using this lead holder, and this is by the brand Staedtler, and this is essentially a 2mm lead holder. So if you press on the top of the pencil, the lead will come out, and this is 2mm lead, and this is HB lead, and so I'm going to put it back, and so that brings me to the lead I use for this. So the lead I use for the Staedtler lead holder is the Staedtler Mars Carbon, and this is just 2B lead. The Staedtler is the brand name, and this is the pack of 12 of HB, and this is a little bit more. It's around $10, I think, for this one, and these are about a couple dollars that I got at my local art store, and these hold about 2 to 3, I believe. And this is HB lead, and you could open it up at one side, and you could see that there's about 2 in there. Same thing for this one, and then if you open up this one, there's a little bit more. So that's the lead it takes. And you also may be wondering how to sharpen it. And I use this, I don't know if you could see it, but I use this Staedtler rotary lead pointer. And this is the cap, but this is the inside where the shavings are collected. And it's a little bit different from your normal sharpener, but I'm going to put that back on. And what you do is there's a little opening at the top. If I put it sideways, you can see this thing spins around the top. And then what you do is you have the lead sticking out, and then you place the whole pencil inside until you hear it. And then, as you can see, you spin it around. You do that for a little bit. So we'll do it a little bit more. It's not quite sharp yet. And the benefit of this rotary lead pointer is that it gets really sharp. The thing about the lead holder is that there's a lead pointer at the end, actually, of the lead holder. So there's a lot of little piece of foam at the top of it that you can put the lead in to clean it off and spin it around. So it comes out a little bit sharper. If you don't want to spend money on getting a rotary lead pointer, there's also one at the top. So you could take off the cap, and there's you could see that little hole right there. Then you stick that in there, and you could spin it around. There's a little blade in there, but it doesn't really get it that sharp, and it leaves a little bit of a mess afterwards. And to sharpen the lead, I use a rotary lead pointer, and this is also by Staedtler. And what this is essentially a sharpener, but for a lead holder. And so this is the cap, I just pulled it off, and then this is the canister that collects all the lead shavings, and you can see there's the blade in there, and you can click it back on, the top spins, and there's a little opening right here that you stick the lead holder in, and then you spin it around and it sharpens it. So to show you, the lead holder is actually sticking out, and then we stick it inside the top, and then you could spin it around like this, and then once you're done, sometimes there's lead shavings that are stuck to the tip of the lead, and so the rotary lead pointer comes with a little bit of foam at the top that you can stick the lead in, and it cleans off the remaining shavings so it doesn't get onto your paper. And that's really handy, and I think it comes with a few extra of these because they get dirty. So what you can also do is at the end there is if you pull off the cap, this is actually a lead pointer as well that you can use that comes with the lead holder itself. The only problem with it is that it can leave a lot of shavings around if you're not around a trash can, and also it kind of sharpens it a little bit weird to where it's not as sharp and it can break easily, or at least the tip of it can break easily, but it just doesn't get as sharp as the rotary lead pointer, but it could still work. So if you don't want to, or you don't have the money to spend on this, this is kind of a luxury, and you can see it still gets pretty sharp. The only problem is if you end up turning it upside down, all this lead shavings are all over your paper and etc. So let's clean that off real quick. And so that's how I sharpen this lead pointer. And if you're just using a regular pencil, you could just use a regular sharpener to sharpen those. And next are my erasers. And on the left I have a white oval eraser, and it's been pretty used, so it doesn't look quite like an oval anymore, but this is really good because it's white, it doesn't really have any dyes or colors in it. So if I'm erasing on white paper, it shouldn't have any streaks of color that get left on the paper. Like for example, if you're using a pink eraser, it won't leave like a pink streak. So that's what I use for a lot of erasing. And another one is a kneaded eraser. And this is pretty cool because you could pull it apart and mold it to whatever you need it to do. And also when you're erasing, it's a little bit softer. So when you start erasing, it doesn't leave a lot of, just as with the white eraser, it doesn't smear a lot, and it also doesn't rip up the paper. This can be a little rough on the paper, especially if you're using fine paper, but a kneaded eraser works really well to preserve the paper and just do soft erasing, and it works perfect for that. And while we're on the topic of erasing, I have these two pretty cool eraser pencils, and this one has a brush at the end, so you could brush away the eraser shavings after you're done. And this one just is a plain eraser pencil, but it has a lot to erase with. And you could also buy refillable sticks, so this is kind of cool. The cool thing about having these eraser pencils though is because they're so small, you can erase fine lines. Basically, as fine as you can draw, you can also erase. And that's why I love having eraser pencils, because sometimes you're working with detail that is really hard to erase without erasing other things. For example, if you're using an eraser like this on very fine detail, you're probably going to erase good parts of your sketch. And the same thing with a kneaded eraser. You could still get kind of small with and pointed with a kneaded eraser, but because it's soft, it doesn't bend as well, and it may not be as easy to erase with. So that's why I like using these eraser pencils. Also, a good thing to have is a ruler, and this is just a small 6-inch ruler, and if you have this, you should be good. This is just a good idea to have for your concepts and sketches that need straight lines. That way you can get there a little bit easier than trying to eyeball it. And moving on to pens, I have a set of Pigma Micron pens, and what these are just fine line pens for inking a lot of the small details and edges of some important designs. And these are ranging in very small sizes, from the smallest on the right and then the biggest are on the left, and these are actually ones that I use to fill in. So these ones are extremely small. You may not be able to see that tip, but if we increase in size, you'll see that the pen gets a little bit bigger on each one. And these are just really good because they don't bleed. They have archival ink, which lasts really long, and they just come up with a really rich black that is really good for digitizing, so you could clearly see what you're doing on the screen. And then these are graphics, and what these aren't as fine, but these are really good for inking the bigger portions of your design because they have the number 2s and number 3s. This is a number 2. And the number 2s and number 3s actually have a flat edge that is really good for just filling in a lot of those. After you ink the edges of your design and then you use the number 2, you can fill in the design pretty easily. There's also a number 1, which is essentially a pointed tip, but it's a little bit bigger than this number 8, and it's in between this number 8 and this number 2. So if you want, you could get a set of those, and those would be really helpful in the inking stages of our design. And a few other pens I like to use are just a regular fine tip Sharpie, and this is black. Another one is the Dual Tombow brush pen, and this is really cool for a lot of different uses. It has a brush pen on this side, which is a little bit of bigger tip, and it has a little bit of pressure sensitivity, so you could do a little bit of different marks with it. On the other side is a fine tipped felt pen, and this is good for fine lines or just writing stuff out. And finally, I have this Pentel Fude brush pen, and this is really cool because it's essentially a refillable cartridge on this side, and it also has plastic bristles rather than actual paintbrush bristles or hair bristles. So these will actually last a lot longer, and they're a little bit designed to actually be pointed. So it's a really quality, pretty good brush pen tip, and with this ink cartridge in the back, you can actually press on it and it will release more. You may be able to see it, but you can release more ink into here, which will essentially be what you end up using. And this is really cool because if you choose not to fill it up that much, then you'll end up getting a little bit of a texture to your strokes, which may be kind of what you're going for if you're looking for something that looks a little bit more organic and paintbrush-like. So if you have little ink in there, you'll actually get more of a paintbrush texture. However, if you want solid black, then you can just press harder and fill this up more with ink, and so you'll get solid strokes that have a little bit broader strokes on the down strokes, and when you go up, they're a little bit thinner. So this is really cool if you're looking for something like that. I like to use it to fill stuff in as well as doing some brush lettering as well. And finally, I'll cover the types of paper I use. So I already mentioned that I use just regular printer paper. It works fine for a lot of the sketches. And then I also have this tracing paper, which is really cool if for some reason I took my brush pen and I had just some rough ideas that I wanted to sketch out on my regular paper. And then if I wanted to, I could take that tracing paper, and then as you can see, it's transparent. So that is a good way to go back over it with, like, say, a pencil if you had a rough ink drawing on the back and you want to redo it a little bit better. And as you can see, I got a little bit of that, a little bit of shavings from earlier that I mentioned. So that's another reason why you should probably get a rotary lead pointer. But what you can do is after you sketch the initial drawing, if you just want to change things without redrawing it and try to get everything perfect, what you can do is just put that tracing paper on top, sketch over it to make it a little bit better, and that way you don't have to redo a lot of the work you've already done, but you could change a little bit of the details. And finally is just plain old Post-it notes. And I like this because of the small size. You're really able to get concepts out really quickly, and in a small scale you don't have a lot of room to work with, so you're kind of forced to just get your idea out and then move on from this small size to something like this. So hopefully that gives you a better idea of what I use and possibly what you may want to use. However, just remember that none of this is really necessary. All you really need is just a pencil, pen, and a piece of paper that you have with you right now. And that should be fine as far as getting your GeoFilter sketched out and then onto the computer. So in the next lesson, we're going to cover the concepting and sketching of your GeoFilter.